Good evening. So my name is Awo Quaison Sackey. I am the Regional Vice President for Human Resources at Newmont Mining. We want to talk about something that I think companies are struggling with. We know we don't have the answers, but I also know that all of us in the room are committed to something. So we're going to talk about what we are doing and how we would like to get into a leadership position in terms of diversity and inclusion. So first of all, I'm going to cover a number of things. I'm going to talk about what we have learned on our journey. We'll talk about some of the myths that we have encountered along the way, and then we'll do an activity halfway through, so make sure you're paying attention when I ask a question for you to answer. And then we'll talk about some of the things that we plan to do in order to make some progress in the area. So the first thing is that we want to define inclusion and diversity, because they're not the same thing. And some companies call it diversity and inclusion. We say inclusion and diversity because we have found that it's important for inclusion to come first. It's the primary element. But diversity may be likened to the ingredients of a cake, for example. So diversity represents the different kinds of differences that exist in your environment. So gender, in some countries there's race differences, sexual orientation differences, things like that, the different kinds of differences. They all come together into a mix, and you want to do something with that mix. And what you do with that mix is what we call inclusion. So you have to have differences in order to have diversity, but in order to get those differences to be able to work together in a particular environment, you have to have inclusion. So it may be a little bit like the chicken and egg. I don't know which comes first. But after working in the US for about 42 years, I know that if you bring women into an environment that is not supportive, they will not stay, or they will not be able to be their best. If you bring anybody that has any kind of difference, I'm going to just use something silly. If you bring bald people into your environment, and the environment is not conducive to bald people because you have to have hair, they're not going to be able to do their best. So whatever the difference is, you need to create an environment where that difference can thrive. So in short, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. So I think you can all relate to that. I've been to many parties where no one asked me to dance. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that Newmont is actually participating in to help us with our journey. So there's an organization called Paradigm for Parity. It's a global organization, was started in the US, and was actually started by some of the female board members of Newmont Mining in Denver, Colorado. And the reason they started this is because they're committed to workplaces where women and men have equal power, equal status, and equal opportunity. So the Paradigm for Parity has asked various corporations to sign a commitment that they will have a certain percentage of their senior managers as women by the year 2030. So our CEO, Gary Goldberg, in 2016 signed that commitment. And then last year, Alvin Pretorius, who is our regional senior vice president, signed the commitment on behalf of Newmont Africa. So we are committed to 30% female in our senior positions by 2030. And I'll tell you a secret that you shouldn't tell anybody, that when we did our extrapolations, it would have taken us until 2094 at the rate we're going to get to that point. So obviously we need to do something different to get to the result that we want to get to. So we have a number of learnings that we've gotten from Paradigm for Parity, but what we found within our own organization are some of the things that are on this screen here, so you can read them for yourself. What Paradigm for Parity provides for us is a roadmap and a toolkit that we've started to implement within our minds. So it's interesting what they say about this. This is one of the quotes from one of their materials, that we take everything seriously, but we have not taken and we have not held ourselves accountable for diversity and inclusion. So companies have worked hard at it, but haven't gotten anywhere. And we are determined to take the leadership role in getting somewhere with this. So the first thing I'd like to give you in terms of statistics, somebody before me talked about why we should be having women in our business, because actually a business is better when there are women around. Do you all agree? Yes. You're all saying that because you're supposed to, because you're at a women's conference today, right? But the statistics show that business is better. So I'm just going to show you some of these statistics. They say that when you have diverse thinking styles, you have 66% more innovation going on in the organization rather than when you have homogeneous styles. Companies with leadership that are supportive of diversity and inclusion are 70% more likely to report new market capture and 45% likely to report growth in market share than companies with leadership that are not supportive of diversity and inclusion. So it's not just gender, but it's the whole notion of allowing people to be their best within an organization. Companies with leaders that give diverse voices equal airtime have employees that are 3.5 times as likely to contribute to the company's full innovative potential. So on the right-hand side, you see some additional statistics. I hope you can read the numbers. But companies that have leveraged diversity and inclusion versus companies that have not have 2 times better market valuation. They see stock price growth that is 1.7 times. Employee engagement is more than 2 times better. And intent to stay, which is one of the indicators of employee engagement as well, is 1.2 times better. So this is not new data. The data has been around for a long time, and people continue to research it. But companies continue to lag behind, and the mining industry, I'm sorry to say, is one of the industries that lags behind. So we have a lot of progress to make. Here are the numbers shown in bigger type, so you can actually see them. It's the same numbers that I gave earlier. So the numbers are compelling. We know that diversity makes a difference. Employees with inclusive managers are 1.3 times as likely to feel that their innovative potential is unlocked. Employees who are able to bring their whole selves to work are 42% less likely to leave their jobs within a year. Teams that follow an inclusive process make decisions 2 times faster, and studies also show that the decisions are better than with half of the meetings required to make those decisions. There's a little exercise that we've done in the office where we have people make individual decisions and log them down, and then we bring the group together and have them make the same decisions. And what we have found is that the team is right more often than the individual. So there are statistics, and you can prove that that is the case, especially when you have diverse teams. So in spite of these statistics, if you talk to various employees, about 40% view their managers as being people who support inclusion and diversity. So we have all the statistics to say that we should be having a diverse workforce, but only 40% of our employees feel that the managers actually support it. And the problem with that is that we also know that managers are the key. You cannot have an inclusive workforce or inclusive workplace unless the managers, who are the people who actually make the decisions, have an inclusive approach to managing people. So they are the key. And there are 3 dimensions that we expect our managers to participate in order for us to make the kind of progress that we need to make. One is in the fairness of the employment practices that we engage in, or they engage in. Inclusion in decision making. In other words, including everybody in the decision. You know how sometimes in the office the manager will go to the same people all the time to help make the decision. That's not inclusion. And then the integration of individual differences, where everybody can participate and not just the people that the manager may feel he's comfortable going to. So here's another quote, that diversity is a fact. You can actually measure diversity, you can count diversity. I can look around the room and I can say there's diversity here because we have women here, we have some young people, we have some old people, we have people with glasses, we have people who are not wearing glasses. There's diversity in this room. You can actually see and touch diversity. Inclusion is a choice, and it's a choice in every moment as to how you behave. and whether or not you make somebody feel included. One of the prior speakers talked about bullying and some behaviors that perhaps were not the most inclusive kind of behaviors. Those kind of behaviors actually turn people off. They don't just turn the women off, they probably turn off the men as well. And the important thing for us is to have people in the company and any company understand that inclusion is a choice. And every moment you have the ability to make a decision that's either inclusive or exclusive in terms of how you talk to somebody or in terms of how you interact with somebody. So there's some myths that we have discovered as we've worked on this journey. And one of the primary myths is that inclusion is easy. It's not. And the reason it's not easy is because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with people's behavior. And you're dealing with people's behavior that you actually cannot control. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to hone in on number 4, 5, and 6. These three myths are myths that we need to dispel. So people think, in our company, people will actually say that diversity is all about women, and that our ultimate goal is to replace all the men with women. People have said that. And that women nationals and local employees are more important to us than everyone else. That's not the case. I mean, obviously, we have an objective to have the population within our company representative of the population of the country. We have 51% women in Ghana. I believe that's the latest statistic. I think it was 51 to 54%. We have 7% females in our organization. That is not representative. So we actually have an objective of getting that number into double digits, into 30%. I like to say that we want to be 50% male. How do you feel when I say that? Actually, let me ask, how do the men feel when I say that we want to be 50% male? But people have been walking around saying we want to be 10% female for a long time, and the women didn't say anything. And the problem is that that opinion ends up showing up in how you act. So we have this notion of bias that we are trying to deal with, and it shows up anywhere in any of the human resources practices that you have. So you find in mining that people will deal with something called similarity bias, where they've worked with certain geologists in the past, they know what that person does, so they want to work with that person again. The problem when you have a male-dominated industry is that all you'll get is men, right? Because that's all there is, unless you're willing to do something different and something out of the ordinary and something innovative to change that picture. We could also talk about the halo effect, where somebody does something good and 10 years later people are saying, well, that person is brilliant because they did something 10 years ago. And they don't look at the other people that might be doing good things, but because that one person continues to carry that halo. So studies have shown that there are different kinds of biases that show up in different kinds of HR practices. And again, the problem is that we actually don't know that we are biased. It's a reflex action in the brain, and we're not conscious to this. We don't consciously choose that behavior. So we call it unconscious bias. And what we want to do is to be able to introduce some ways in which we can interrupt the automaticity of the behavior, so that people actually start to think about how they're acting with the person they're interacting with, and actually start to interact with the person that is sitting across from them, and not with something in their brain that's a stereotype like, oh, that dog is lazy. You understand what I'm saying? Okay. So again, we have three areas that we need to deal with in order to deal with the unconscious bias and overcome some of these challenges with inclusion. The fairness of employment practices, integration of individual differences, and inclusion in decision making. So for example, when it comes to managing teams, a manager can take steps to create common ground for all the team members by creating team goals that everybody has a say in creating, by having values and norms so that everyone is supported by these, and then we're reinforcing these at every meeting. So people know exactly what their role is and the part that they can play. Managers can individualize their team members, learn more about them, so learn how to have somebody bring their best to the party, as opposed to assuming that they don't need that support or that help. Encourage and manage productive conflict so people can actually interact in a way that furthers the objectives of the team. And then use all the team members and try to use them equally. I don't think it's ever possible to use people equally, but you can actually strive to do that so nobody feels like they're not included. In our journey, we've actually found some best practices. So we've actually incorporated that into how Newmont operates. Inclusion should be driven from senior leadership, and it has to be part of the brand. So I'm going to share a definition of leadership with you. This is one that I think captures the essence of what is needed. Leadership is the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. And what that means is that as a leader, there are behaviors that you actually want to assume, and we've got some of them here. We've got 4 key behaviors: empowering people, holding people accountable, showing courage, and showing humility. Those are the hallmarks of an inclusive leader. I'm just going to flip over to a couple of points around Newmont itself, just to end my 1.5 minutes that I have left. So, flipping over. My colleague told me I had too many slides when I put them together. I told her, don't bother me. She was right. So, so at Newmont, we have a journey, and the journey includes dealing with the workplace, which is the inclusion part, dealing with the workforce, making sure we have representation, and then dealing with the community. I'm just going to share one last thing with you that we think is going to make actually 2 last things. One is that we have developed a leadership brand. So we've defined behaviors that we expect our leaders to adopt and to role model so that we can have the kind of leadership that will further inclusion. And then secondly, we're engaging in what we consider to be some, I'll call it state-of-the-art activity. I don't know whether you've heard of design thinking. It's a mode of innovation that came out of Harvard. But we're using a design thinking approach to experiment with our recruiting and hiring with blind resumes, inclusive job postings, and diverse hiring and slates and interview panels to see what we can learn about how managers make decisions. It's going to help us to understand what biases come into play specifically for us, so we can actually start to deal with those biases and eliminate them as much as possible so we can encourage and be more inviting to women in our workforce. So on that note, I will end. I could have said a lot more, but I appreciate the fact that I've been able to share some of Newmont's journey with you today. Thank you for your time.